This video is sponsored by War Thunder. Out in the California desert, the US Army keeps a secret most people have never seen. Here, spread across 36,000 acres of barren land, more than 26,000 armored vehicles, including tanks, Bradleys, and Humvees, sit parked in endless rows. At first glance, they look abandoned. Steel hulks baking in the sun, a mechanical graveyard of sorts, stretching to the horizon. But step back, and the picture becomes something more. This isn't just storage. It's not a junkyard, and these vehicles are not abandoned. It's a powerful reminder of the scale of America's military might. Indeed, we all know the US military is vast, but seeing its surplus stockpile like this, well, it gives you something to think about. So why here, in the middle of nowhere? Why would the Army preserve so many weapons of war from bygone times, and what will ultimately become of this armored reserve? Stay tuned to find out as we discover the story of the Sierra Army Depot. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. I'd like to start today's episode by offering a little greater context. For as long as there have been armies, there have been stockpiles. The idea of a stockpile isn't new. From the very beginning, survival meant keeping more than you immediately needed. Even ancient kingdoms knew to store things like grain in silos, not just to feed their people, but to sustain armies on march. And as weapons became more sophisticated, so did their stockpiles. Take the Assyrians, who were known to keep centralized arsenals more than 2,500 years ago. We're talking warehouses of spears, bows, and chariots that were ready for service when a new campaign began. We could also mention the Romans, who perfected this practice, as every frontier fortress doubled as a supply base, holding racks of spare weapons, siege engines, and food rations to equip reinforcements when needed. Whereas in the Middle Ages, Europe's castles and fortified cities weren't just defensive strongholds, they were community warehouses. Behind stone walls, city arsenals stockpiled armor, crossbows, pikes, and barrels of gunpowder. Take Venice's great arsenal, first established in the 1100s, which became one of the most advanced stockpiling and shipbuilding complexes in the world, capable of arming an entire fleet from materials stored within its walls. With that in mind, when Europeans came over to America, the tradition was carried on. By the 19th century, nearly every major US city had its armory. Buildings that weren't only symbolic of civic pride, but functional depots where militias could draw rifles, ammunition, and uniforms in times of crisis. The Gothic-style armories that still dot cities like New York, Boston, and Chicago are relics of this mindset of stockpiling. But then, as American might grew, so too did its stockpiles. By World War I, the scale had advanced dramatically. America began motorizing warfare, transitioning from horse-drawn wagons to mechanized transport. Between 1913 and 1919, thousands of Nash quads and Model B trucks rolled off production lines, or more specifically, more than 11,500 quads and over 14,000 3-ton trucks were delivered to the US Army and Allies. From 1917 to 1918 alone, the US Army's Liberty truck, designed as a standardized military cargo vehicle, saw approximately 9,364 units built before the armistice. Meanwhile, the first American-made tank, modeled after the Renault FT, was commissioned with about 950 completed, but it only arrived overseas after the war had ended. Even as industrialization grew, the impulse was the same: keep the tools of war ready, but now in factories, as opposed to armories. Then came World War II. The US overturned every precedent. Between 1940 and 1945, American factories churned out nearly 89,000 armored fighting vehicles, including tanks, self-propelled guns, and carriers, along with millions of trucks and aircraft to equip not only its own forces, but also those of the Allies. It should be noted, however, that as a consequence of this, civilian automobile production effectively collapsed. In 1941 alone, the US produced approximately 3 million cars. After that, cars nearly vanished from assembly lines. Anyhow, amid that industrial surge, the US sought places to hold its vast collection of vehicles. In 1942, amid California's high desert, about 55 miles north of Reno, the Army began building a new logistics factory, the Sierra Army Depot. Selected for its dry air, which curbed rust, its remote location, safe from coastal threats, and access to rail lines, the location struck a golden balance of permanence and accessibility. Sierra didn't train troops, it stored their gear. Vehicles, weapons, rations, uniforms, you name it. It all sat ready for redeployment. And with it, that timeless logic endured. Prepare for war by storing today what you might need tomorrow. And in that context, when the guns of World War II finally fell silent, the US found itself with something no previous nation had ever possessed: an overwhelming surplus of war machines. Now, scrapping them was an option, but the world was already splitting into East and West. The Soviet Union was consolidating its influence in Eastern Europe, and American planners understood that another conflict could erupt at any moment, which meant the stockpiles couldn't be wasted. They had to be preserved, and so it was. The Sierra Army Depot became one of the key redepository sites of that strategy. According to Army records, by the early 1950s, thousands of armored vehicles and artillery pieces were lined up in its desert flats. M4 Shermans from World War II, which were gradually phased out and replaced by newer M47 and M48 tanks. By the late 1960s, long rows of M113 armored personal carriers, first deployed in Vietnam, were driven straight from active duty into storage. Upon arrival, they were mothballed in open air. As I mentioned earlier, the desert's low humidity made for an ideal environment. Engines were drained of fluids, interiors sealed against pests, and protective coatings applied to the exposed metal. By the height of the Cold War, Sierra held tens of thousands of vehicles. At this point, the flats resembled something of a mechanical archive. And what purpose did they serve, just sitting idle? Well, the Army called it a strategic reserve. In the event that a war broke out with the Soviet Union, Sierra's machines could be overhauled and shipped right back into service. However, in practice, many were stripped for parts, cannibalized to keep newer fleets running, or refurbished and transferred to Allied nations under US military aid programs. By the 1970s, Sierra wasn't just a depot, it was the shadow of America's arsenal. Tens of thousands of vehicles in perfect rows, waiting for a war that never came. And speaking of vast arsenals and military vehicles, that actually brings me to today's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, which you can jump into right now on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or even your mobile phone. It's a combat simulator with incredible levels of realism, where you can take control of planes, tanks, and warships in battles spanning from World War II to modern-day conflicts. With more than 2,500 authentic military vehicles from 10 major nations, War Thunder throws you into air, land, and sea battles with ultra-detailed graphics, authentic sounds, realistic physics, and dynamic maps that make you feel like you're inside an interactive documentary. And the best part? You can play cross-platform with your friends, no matter what device they're on. And if you're interested in US military history, I recommend starting with the American tech tree. Tanks like the M4 Sherman, naval destroyers, and legendary fighters like the iconic P-51 Mustang, all recreated with stunning historical accuracy. So join 95 million other players today on PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile. And check this out. If you register using the links in the description or pinned comment, you'll get an exclusive bonus pack, available for both PC and consoles if you're new or if you haven't played in the last 6 months. It includes several premium vehicles, the exclusive Eagle of Valor decal, 100,000 Silver Lion, and 7 days of premium account access to kickstart your progress. This is a limited time offer, so don't sleep on it. Download and play War Thunder for free using the links in the description or pinned comment. If you're passionate about history, this is one of those experiences that combines the best of historical accuracy with the tactical adrenaline of combat. Thank you, War Thunder, for supporting the channel, but now, back to our story. By the 1980s, Sierra's mission had shifted from simply parking vehicles to something far more destructive. Each day, crews hauled obsolete shells, rockets, and bombs into earth pits, where they were open burned or detonated in 10,000-pound lots under California's hazardous waste permits. What had once been about preserving war materials was now just as much about dismantling it. Out in the Honey Lake Valley, the work was hard to miss. Reports described seasons when 5 to 10 million pounds of ordnance went up each year. And it went on like this for years. In 1995 alone, Sierra eliminated roughly 56 million pounds of outdated munitions, as well as 200 spent rocket motors, a snapshot of just how much Cold War residue the Army was trying to clear from its books. But then, the first Gulf War reset the mission. When Desert Storm ended, operational project stocks, specialized gear the Army pre-positions for contingencies, flowed back to Sierra. Petroleum and water systems, along with bridging devices and pieces of pop-up tent cities, were all received, sorted, and held ready for the next call. Or, as one Army sustainment account put it, quote, "After Desert Storm, we sent all of our operational project stocks to Sierra Army Depot." Though this was expected, as the pivot became formal in 1993 when Sierra was designated the Army Center of Technical Excellence for Operational Project Stocks, home base for the Big Three kits: the Inland Petroleum Distribution System, Water Support System, and Force Provider, which is a 550-person deployable camp. Unlike the Cold War era, it was a subtle kind of readiness: fuel lines, purification plants, and entire villages on pallets, staged in the desert for a war that was yet to come. It should also be mentioned that around this time, Washington actually wanted to shrink the ammunition footprint. A 1995 base realignment and closure reduced Sierra's long-term ammo storage and pushed it further into the demilitarization lane, to the point that, by 2000, the Pentagon was openly considering closing the mission altogether. Local headlines captured the moment, reading, "Save money, move the munitions, and keep the depot alive by changing what it does." Then came 9/11. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq sent waves of equipment into the theater, and then back out again. Sierra's role wasn't glamorous, but it was decisive. Receive retrograde gear, inspect it, rebuild it, and regenerate it for the units that needed it next. Now, interestingly, the same California file that once documented daily detonations revealed yet another shift. After September 2001, open burn/detonation was restricted to emergency or national security cases only, which most of the public took as a positive development. Anyhow, realignment finally caught up in the next BRAC round. An Army release in 2010 confirmed Sierra was leaving the ammunition business, transferring the last items a year ahead of the deadline. An accomplishment made possible partly by the Golden Cargo exercise that moved tons of ordnance out of the county and into other depots built for that mission. Meanwhile, the Sierra leaned heavy into vehicles, kits, and the art of giving old equipment a second life. Somewhat surprisingly, the older surplus became strategic, be it unexpectedly. In 2011, Reuters reported that Sierra had become the primary storage site for more than 30,000 jigs, miscellaneous fixtures, and toolings for the F-22 Raptor, the kind of industrial antique you keep around in case you might need to build or service a fleet in a hurry. By the late 2010s, leaders were squeezing more out of every square foot. An Army profile in 2019 described crews as widening the doors on 801 surviving ammunition igloos, replacing heavy blast doors with roller doors so forklifts could finally move pallets quickly in and out, as well as many other similar improvements. Now, these might sound small and insignificant at first, but they had major consequences. Fast turns and fewer bottlenecks meant that the depot could behave less like a warehouse and more like a factory floor. Then came another strategic swing. In 2020, as the Marine Corps divested its tank battalion under Force Design 2030, the last Marine M1 Abrahams rolled out of 29 Palms, bound for long-term storage, split between Sierra and Anniston Army Depot. And once again, The Army became the ledger of choice, but this time not for a Cold War, rather for a service reimagining itself in the Pacific. And Sierra didn't just wait for shipments. In 2022, a small team of depot artisans left for the National Training Center to get a struggling armor battalion's M2A3 Bradleys back on the line. They swapped modules, replaced fuel tanks, cleared long-standing faults, and pushed the unit's readiness from 50 to 80% ahead of a European rotation under Operation Atlantic Resolve. And here's the thing, the depot, in a sense, had now gone mobile. But what about those old machines, like the ones from World War II? Well, to be honest, those were mostly long gone long before the 21st century took shape, scrapped, sold, or memorialized elsewhere, meaning the rows you see today skewed decisively towards the Cold War and later years. M60s in the foreground of Army imagery and hundreds of M113 variants stretching to the horizon as a collection meant for modern regeneration, not nostalgia. Finally, we need to address an undignified truth. You see, unlike ships with plaques or aircraft preserved in museums with their victories etched on display, Sierra's vehicles don't seem to carry their individual histories with them. Out of the more than 20,000 tanks, carriers, and Humvees parked out in the desert, their individual and specific battle stories have been widely lost. When they arrived here, they were lined up for storage, recycling, or rebirth. It's less about the memorial and more about logistics. So here's where I'd like you to help out. If you have special knowledge on this topic, or perhaps served with the vehicle that ended up at the Sierra Depot, or perhaps know a specific story tied to one of these machines, please share it with all of us in the comment section below. I truly look forward to hearing your insights. And another thanks to War Thunder. Remember, it's free to download on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile devices. You can use the links in the pinned comment or description to jump in. And if you're new or coming back after 6 months, you'll get an exclusive bonus pack on PC and consoles. That includes premium vehicles, 100,000 Silver Lions, 7 days of premium account time, and more. It's a limited time offer, so don't miss it. Otherwise, until next time, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.